Thank you, Alyssa, and welcome everybody. Welcome all participants. And I have 1 hour to talk about Stanley Kubrick. And I'm just going to very briefly introduce myself because there's a lot to obviously talk about with somebody who has such a distinguished career that Kubrick has. My name is Greg Blank. I am a film and TV producer. I produced about 5 years for a show on Verizon Fios One News when there was a Verizon Fios One News called Push Pause, and I produced several documentary films. I'm also a film historian and a film lecturer. So I'm very pleased to talk about one of my all-time favorite directors, Stanley Kubrick. And truth be told, I can do entire lectures on just specific films of Stanley Kubrick's career. I have an entire lecture, 2.5 hour lecture on 2001: A Space Odyssey, the making of it, the meaning of it, the interpretations of it. And that's just an example of what Kubrick was as a director. He was an incredibly dense and detail oriented director who put a lot of meaning into all of his films. And for me personally, I mean, when you think about the great American film directors of all time, in the pantheon of great filmmakers, you can put Alfred Hitchcock, Orson Welles, Martin Scorsese, people like that, John Ford, and Stanley Kubrick is certainly among them. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share here, and you'll see me noodle around on my computer a little bit as I attempt to sort of bring up my PowerPoint and this and that. But I'm going to show you a little bit of Stanley Kubrick and who he was. So this is the life and career of Stanley Kubrick, presented by me, Greg Blank. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to Alyssa and the Syosset Library for facilitating this. I appreciate it very much. So Stanley Kubrick's filmography, you can see right there, he started his film career with a movie called Fear and Desire in 1951, which was not a very, it was actually completed in 1953. It wasn't a very well-known film, a little over an hour long, but it got the attention of some people who were making another film, which is actually not on here. It's a film called Killer's Kiss, which was in 1953 as well, which led to a film called The Killing, and that was really what launched his career because it got the attention of Kirk Douglas, who then went on to star in Paths of Glory and also produced the film Spartacus, who he got Kubrick to direct. And although Spartacus is not generally considered a film that is in Kubrick's sort of pantheon, it is a Stanley Kubrick directed film, but it was not a film that he wrote or produced or had much say in the production of, and I think that really irked him. And from that point on, he only had full control over all of his films. And if you look at that list, starting from Paths of Glory all the way up until Eyes Wide Shut, at least 5 or 6 of them are in the pantheon of great films ever made. Probably his magnum opus is 2001: A Space Odyssey, but Doctor Strangelove, A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Paths of Glory are all considered among some of the greatest films ever made. In my opinion, his 3 best films are Paths of Glory, Doctor Strangelove, and 2001, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to get just my opinion. We're here to talk about Stanley Kubrick. So Stanley Kubrick was born in Manhattan in 1928. He was raised in the Bronx, and from an early age, he was a brilliant and intellectually curious person, but he was very self-taught. He was not a very good student, and primarily it was because with a lot of very brilliant kids, he just didn't have the interest in studying, but he was interested in learning on his own, and he early on developed 2 great passions. His passions were chess and photography. And one of the clips I'm going to show you, and we're going to hear a lot about Kubrick's early life through the words of Stanley Kubrick himself. Okay, because after he took he took an apprenticeship with Look magazine, which was a photo magazine of its day, and he became an apprentice to a photographer there, and eventually a full-time photographer for Look magazine. And that picture that you see on the right is a very iconic picture that he took, and it's what really kind of launched his career with Look magazine. And he also did a photo essay called Prize Fighter, which became the subject of his very first short documentary called Dave the Fight in 1951. And Kubrick had influences that were very much based on the film of the time that he got to see a lot of in his hometown of New York City. He went a lot to the Museum of Modern Art and local cinema in New York City. He was inspired by the films of Orson Welles, Elia Kazan, who he considered to be the greatest American director of that time, Fritz Lang, Federico Fellini, Ingmar Bergman, Vittorio De Sica, Sergei Eisenstein, and Max Ophuls. And Kubrick actually wrote to Ingmar Bergman, you can see there, your vision has moved me deeply, much more deeply than I have ever been moved by any films. I believe you are the greatest filmmaker at work today. So obviously Bergman was a Swedish director, so that doesn't conflict with his feelings towards Kazan. And Max Ophuls was also a very big influence on Kubrick. He learned a lot about the moving camera technique. You see, in a lot of Kubrick's films, one of the real signatures of Kubrick's filmmaking is his ability to use moving camera. You see that early on, even in The Killing. You see that in Paths of Glory. There's a great scene, which is the battle sequence, which he really used the films of the documentary films from World War I to sort of relive those battle scenes from the World War I scenes in Paths of Glory. And I think Max Ophuls was a big influence on him. And you can see there, he wrote that Ophuls, for me, possessed every possible quality. He has an exceptional flair for sniffing out good subjects, and he got the most out of them. He was also a marvelous director of actors. And Kubrick really tried to, and I'm going to come out of the, I'm going to come out of my screen share for a moment just to talk to you about Kubrick's real influence for his subject matter was he liked to find a subject in a novel or a short story and use that as raw material. So you'll see that every one of Kubrick's films, he was not a screenwriter in the traditional sense of coming up with an idea out of the blue, as opposed to, say, like a Quentin Tarantino. But Tarantino is primarily a writer of films, but he's also obviously a director. But I think what separates somebody like Tarantino from Kubrick is Kubrick looked for the raw material in a novel or in a story, and from there he would mold it and craft it into cinema. And one of the interesting things is to look at the source material that he worked with, and a novel like Lolita, for example, or The Shining, even 2001, which was one of the rare examples of a story that he co-wrote with Arthur C. Clarke at the time, that they kind of developed the screenplay together. It was based on a short story by Clarke called The Sentinel. But that was, if you remember 2001, that was just the beginning part of 2001, where they go and find the monolith on the moon. That was the entirety of the short story, The Sentinel, was that. And then Kubrick and Clarke expanded on it from there. But he took these sort of raw diamonds and shaped them and made them into cinema. And that's what I think was one of his powers. He also obviously wrote a lot of those screenplays to make them more cinematic and to make the dialogue work for the scene in the film. So he was working with some great material, but he definitely made it his own. So I'm going to go back to my screen share and my PowerPoint here. And so his early filmmaking career started with a lot of documentary shorts. 1951, like I said earlier, Day of the Fight was just a short documentary about a prize fighter, sort of a day in the life of a prize fighter that he had done that prize fighter photo essay for Look magazine. And then the next short film, Flying Padre, was basically just a short. It was pretty interesting because you can kind of see, and I wish I had more time to show you some of these clips, but I'm not going to get to all these clips, but you can kind of see his flair for the cinematic in that short film, Flying Padre. It was just a single engine plane that a priest would fly himself to this remote island, I think in South America, to minister to the people there. And then his first feature was a film called Fear and Desire, which was basically a war film about 4 American soldiers who were stranded behind enemy lines, and their journey to find to get home. And it was not really a success at the time, but it was his first feature. And he made another short called The Seafarers, which was commissioned by the Seafarers Union. And then in 1955, he made a film called Killer's Kiss, which, like I said, it wasn't really a commercial success, but it did get the attention of some producers who ended up doing The Killing. And The Killing was really his first successful film. And I'm going to go ahead and try to show you this little documentary here that has Stanley Kubrick talking about his early life and his early influences. And there's nothing better than hearing about someone's life from themselves. And Kubrick was a very reclusive person who didn't do a lot of interviews. He was notoriously afraid of flying. And so once he moved to England during the filming of Lolita, he never really left there. That he was from New York City and he grew up there and he lived there. But after doing the Hollywood thing with Spartacus, he really kind of settled in England and didn't really leave there. So most of his films that were shot in the United States or in other parts of the world were shot with a second unit director because he didn't like to fly. So this interview was compiled by Jim Casey from a series of tape recordings made by Jeremy Bernstein, who was writing a profile on Kubrick for New Yorker magazine in 1966. And this is right around the time that he was making 2001: A Space Odyssey. So we'll bring that up.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Jeremy Bernstein, tape, November 27, side A. Born July 26, 1928. New York City. My father is a doctor. One sister, Barbara, married, 2 children, lives in New Jersey, 6 years younger. Her husband is a lawyer. I was taught to play chess at the age of 12, but did not play seriously until about the age of 17. When I joined the Marshall Chess Club in New York on West 10th Street. I had few intellectual interests as a child. I was a school misfit and considered, reading a book schoolwork. And I don't think I read a book for pleasure until after I graduated high school. I had one thing I think that perhaps helped me get over being a misfit, a school misfit, and that is that I became interested in photography about the same time, 12 or 13. I started out by just, getting a camera and learning how to take pictures and learning how to print pictures and learning how to build a darkroom and learning how to do all the technical things and so on and so on. And then finally trying to find out how you could sell pictures and become would it be possible to be a professional photographer? And it was a case of over a period of, say, from the age of 13 to 17, you might say, going through step by step by myself without anybody really helping me, the problem solving of becoming a photographer. And I found that, I think in looking back, that this particular thing about problem solving is something that schools generally don't teach you. And that if you can develop a kind of generalized approach to problem solving, that it's surprising how it helps you in anything. So I think that photography might have been more valuable than, doing the proper things in school. And, most of the English courses that I had consisted of the teacher saying, you to read 5 pages of Silas Marner tonight. And the next day the class was spent in sitting at the book like Emil Jannings in The Blue Angel, looking up over the book and saying, Mr. Kubrick, and then you stand up and they say, when Silas Marner walked out of the door, what did he see? And if you didn't know what he saw, you got a 0. and that was it. And as a matter of fact, I failed English once and had to make it up in summer school. Well, I had developed myself as a photographer, and prior to graduating high school, I had sold 2 picture stories to look. Oh, and I also sold them a picture. I sold them 2 picture stories and a photograph of a news dealer sitting on 170th Street in the Grand Concourse with all the headlines saying Roosevelt, dies, FDR dead. And he was sitting there looking depressed. And they liked this picture and used it in a whole series about Roosevelt, and it was sort of the final picture of the series. Well, I was apprentice photographer for 6 months, and then I became a staff photographer, and I was there for 4 years. And of course, that would have been the period I'd spent in college, and I think that the things, what I learned, and the practical experience in every respect, including photography, what I learned in that 4-year period exceeded what I could have learned in school. And also getting out of school, I can't remember what was the particular turning point, but being out of school, I began to read, and within a relatively short period of time, I would imagine caught up with where I probably should have been had I had a modicum of interest in things in the high school. Like everybody else, I was always very interested in movies, and I used to go to see films, and say practically every film. There was the post-war Italian sort of Rossellini pictures, which brought the art houses into existence. So there weren't that many good films that were ever played in the theaters around, except the museum. A friend of mine, who subsequently has become a film director, named Alex Singer, was working as an office boy at the March of Time, and one day he told me that it cost $40,000 to make a March of Time, and it was a one-reeler. And I said to him, "Gee, that's a lot of money." I said, "I can't believe it costs that much to make, 8 or 9 minutes of film." So I called up Eastman Kodak and checked on the price of film, and then I called up the laboratory and found out how much it cost to develop it, and I checked on how much it cost to rent 35mm movie cameras, and I checked the cost of the other facilities, sound and editing and so forth, and I forgot what it added up to, but it was something like that I could do a documentary film for about $3,500. So I thought, gee, if they're making these pictures for $40,000 and I can make them for $3,500, surely I must be able to sell them and at least get my money back and probably make a profit. So in fact, I think we thought that we could make a considerable profit because we assumed that if they were making them for $40,000 a piece, that they must be making a profit, And so I rented a 35mm IMO camera. That's spelled EYEMO, which is a spring-wound camera. Produces a professional picture. And I did a documentary film about a boxer named Walter Cartier, who I had previously done a picture story for Look about, and I knew him. And it was called Day of the Fight. And got the whole thing, did everything. Alex helped me, sort of carried lights around and assisted me, and I did the whole thing, just myself and Alex, and Walter and his people that he knew, and cut it. And another friend of mine who subsequently has become a professional movie composer named Gerald Fried, F-R-I-E-D, did a film score and got the whole thing finished for $3,900. And then when we began to take it around to the various companies to sell it, they all liked it, but we were offered things like $1,500 and $2,500 and so forth. At one point, I said to them, Christ, why are you offering us so little for this? One reel shorts, get more than $40,000. And they said, "What? You must be crazy." And I said, "Why do you think that?" And so I told them about the March of Time, and anyway, they said it was, was ridiculous. And shortly after that, the March of Time went out of business for the reason we later found out that they were spending approximately, if the March of Time sues me for this, Alex somehow found out when he was working there that it was costing $40,000 to make one of their one-reelers, and they went out of business. Well, anyway, I finally sold the film to RKO Pathé, who are no longer in business either, and sold it for about $100 less than it cost me to make it. I know it was a small loss, But I had the pleasure of seeing it shown, and I remember I went to the Paramount Theater where it was playing with some Ava Gardner, Robert Mitchum picture, and it was very exciting to see it on the screen, and it got a nationwide and worldwide distribution. And so I thought everybody liked it, and they thought it was good, and I thought that this would be I'd get millions of offers, from which I got none to do anything. I made another documentary, this time about a flying priest. Father Stockmuller or something in New Mexico, who flew a Piper Cub around to Indian parishes. I know RKO thought it was a colorful subject, and so I went there and pretty much on my own again made this short, and still, nothing was happening. And
were they supporting you for this?
No, they gave me $1,500. And of which I had to pay for the film, the travel, and everything. I made nothing. I think I lost money on that too. But I had been making a reasonably good salary, it looked, for 4 years, so I had a certain amount of money. And I was still working. So then I quit Look, because I decided that there obviously wasn't any money in shorts, but that I then found out how much feature films were being made for, and millions, and I had calculated that I could make a feature film for about $10,000. And
well, how did you calculate that?
Well, again, by projecting the amount of film I'd shoot, figuring that I could get actors to work for practically nothing, work with. At this point, I was the whole crew: cameraman, assistant cameraman, director, everything. So I had no cost. So a friend of mine in the village did a script about 4 soldiers from an unnamed country lost behind enemy lines, trying to find their way home again. I didn't really know what I didn't know, and I thought, well, Christ, there really can't be very much more to making a feature film, and I certainly couldn't make one worse than the films that I kept seeing every week. But I wasn't satisfied to just make an interesting film. I wanted it to be a very poetic and meaningful film. I got the film made, and but it was very, very dull, and it got an art house distribution. It was called Fear and Desire, distributed by Joseph Burston, who was at one time, I think he was the distributor who first brought in Rossellini's pictures. It got a few reasonably good reviews. It got a nice blurb from Mark Van Doren, and who was very kind about it. And it had a few, good moments in it, but with the exception of 1 or 2 of the actors, they were all terrible actors, and I knew nothing about directing any actors.
How did you go about directing them? Just sort of.
Well, I don't remember. It was really, well, actually, from some of the so-called professional efforts I've subsequently seen, people doing, I would say I didn't go about it that much differently than a lot of people do, but I didn't really know anything, But there were some good moments in it, and as I say, it even got a few good reviews. It opened at the Guild Theater in New York, and it was pretty apparent, that it was terrible, and while it was still playing, I decided, well, I'd better get another script very fast, and try to promote some more money on the strength of just the fact that the thing was playing, because it wasn't apparent to me how I was going to earn a living or do anything, And again, not one single offer ever to do anything, In about 2 weeks, knocked together another script with somebody, and this time it was sort of a reaction to the other one. This was nothing but action sequences and a more sort of mechanically constructed sort of action gangster plot. Mobile co-produced and put up the money to make Killer's Kiss. That was not a great financial success. It was at that time that I was playing chess for quarters in the park. I was playing chess for quarters. I mean, I was doing for the fun of it, but I also did make about $2 or $3 a day, which it really goes a long way if you're not buying anything except food.
How many hours a day were you putting in down there?
Well, when I was waiting for things to happen, waiting to get an answer on something, which went on for months, sometimes, I would go there about 12 o'clock and stay there until, midnight. We formed the company, which was called Harris Kubrick Pictures. After looking for a story, we bought a book called The Clean Break by Lionel White. And this was the story that we made into The Killing for United Artists. Well, first of all, United Artists' function was only to finance and distribute the films. It was up to us to hire the people and make the film. And I presume that United Artists thought that if The Killer's Kiss could be made, on the semi-professional basis it was, that with an adequate amount of money, which was fairly minimum, we could make a film. Jimmy had to guarantee completion of the movie, which means that if the movie ran over the budget, he had to put up all the extra money, which is a great safeguard, and especially since financially he was responsible to make this kind of a guarantee, it wasn't that much of a risk. Well, we had a very good cast, but none of the people were big stars in the sense that they were extremely choosy about what they were in. The principal cast was Sterling Hayden, Colleen Gray, Marie Windsor, Elisha Cook Jr., Joe Sawyer, Ted DeCorsia, Vince Edwards. So anyway, we made The Killing, and somehow Dory Sherry saw it and he liked it. He was the first one who really showed any interest in us, to the extent of offering us any sort of a deal to make another picture.
All right, so there you have a really good kind of backstory in Kubrick's own words about his career up until Paths of Glory. So now you have a solid foundation of sort of understanding a little bit of where he came from and how he developed as a filmmaker. And that's sort of the backstory, the origin story, if you will. I'm actually going to come out of my screen share for a moment. Actually, no, I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to go back and talk about Paths of Glory, which to me is really one of Kubrick's best films, and based on a book by Humphrey Cobb, set in World War I, and it really did take a bleak look at warfare. It was not a glorification of war at all, and if you haven't seen Paths of Glory, I urge you to see it, because it really is one of the great war films ever made. In my opinion, it's like I said, one of Kubrick's best. And it was pretty controversial because of the fact that it did take a view of war that was very much against the concept of war. And as you can see there, it said it presents a bleaker, more realistic vision of war than most films up until then, and would touch on themes that he would explore in films in the future: ethical dilemmas and the horrors of war, the duality of man. Certainly that was explored in A Clockwork Orange, and the barbarism of the human species, which you could look at many of his films, and 2001 is a great example of looking at the technology that was formed as a result of the monolith kind of giving the primitive man the idea to use technology, and then what does he do? He uses it to bash, to kill, and that's a theme that Kubrick explores in a lot of his films. So Paths of Glory in 1957, it really kind of defined Kubrick as a great director. He became instantly recognized as a titan of the directing field, and obviously working with Kirk Douglas led to the next film that he directed, which was Spartacus in 1960. Now, Kubrick was not the original director of the film. It was a director named Anthony Mann, and Kirk Douglas was not happy with Mann's directing, and he suggested to the studio that that Kubrick replace him. And the screenplay was written by Dalton Trumbo, who was blacklisted at the time. And it was actually Kirk Douglas who insisted that Trumbo get writing credit, and that helped sort of end his the blacklist and kind of relaunch Trumbo's career. And the film was a commercial success, and it's considered really one of the great films ever made. A lot of people don't even think of Spartacus as a Kubrick film, but it is. It's a film that he directed, but it was not a film that he was very proud of, and it was a film that he actually decided to sort of disassociate from, because he had such a hard time working with Kirk Douglas, who was also one of the film's producers, and just the studio. And it was a tremendous film, and it showed that Kubrick could make these incredibly ambitious types of films and have a command of a set that, I mean, I think that it was shot over 170 days and had something like 10,000 people associated with it in terms of cast and crew and all of that. It was a big, huge production, but it was not something that Kubrick really wanted to focus on. He wanted to move on to his own films that he could really shape and have complete control over. And the next film he did in 1962, which is a film that he co-wrote with Vladimir Nabokov, Lolita, which was based on Nabokov's 1955 novel, which is really considered one of the great novels of the 20th century. And Nabokov wrote the screenplay. Kubrick really tinkered with a lot, especially in terms of the order of events. He took the ending and put it in the beginning of the film, and that was not written in the book that way. And he also really the Peter Sellers character of Quilty was much more of a prominent role in Kubrick's film. And it was that's obviously Peter Sellers doing what he does, and Peter Sellers is just incredible in that film. And he played a lot of different characterizations in that movie. He was Quilty the whole time, but he would always do different voices and different accents and different characters. And I think you can see that, where this is going, because the next film is Dr. Strangelove. But the movie Lolita was a very successful it was a pretty successful film from a commercial standpoint, although it was very controversial at the time. This was a kind of a taboo subject, and I think Kubrick tried to tone down some of the suggestiveness of the novel. In the novel, the girl Lolita was, I believe, 12, and I think in the movie she's a little bit older, and the actress who played her, Sue Line, was 14 at the time. And it was really Kubrick's, first really commercial successful film that he wrote and directed and produced himself. And it introduced that collaboration with Peter Sellers. And the next film that Kubrick made, which is arguably his best, it's certainly one of the great comedies of all time, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, 1965. And what I love about this movie, and interestingly enough, it was not originally written as a comedy. It was going to be a straightforward telling of the book. Hold on one second. I just have to come out of this for a second. The book Red Alert by Peter George was it was a pretty straightforward Cold War kind of drama. And what Kubrick discovered in the course of writing this screenplay was that this could really work as a comedy. And the producers were like, well, no, let's just tell him. He's like, no, this is going to really work as a comedy. And he cast it very straight. And I think that it's funny, as a film lover, one of the things that you look for in a film of a specific genre is, does it sort of meet does it check the boxes of that genre? And this film is not shot like a comedy at all. It really looks like a straightforward Cold War thriller. And the set design, and this is also an indication of who Kubrick was as a director. He was very meticulous about that the war room looked like a real war room. It had that huge set built. All of the details were very spot on and very meticulously noticed and important to Kubrick. And his production designer and the cinematographer, they all had those details in mind. and that's obviously something he would carry on to his next film, which would be 2001. But Doctor Strangelove was a really great film. It had one of the greatest scenes of all time, where I wish I had time to show it to you, where Peter Sellers is playing. He plays three characters. He plays one of them is obviously Doctor Strangelove, and he also plays the President of the United States. And in one scene, he's talking to the President of Russia, trying to explain to him that he accidentally may bomb his country, and it's just one of the great scenes of all time. And it was nominated for several Academy Awards. Peter Sellers for Best Actor, and it is really considered one of his best films, if not his masterpiece. But really, I think that distinction has to go to his next film, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was based on a 1951 short story called The Sentinel by Arthur C. Clarke. And this film came about because Kubrick, always wanting to challenge himself, basically said, I want to make a science fiction movie. Science fiction is one of those genres that just doesn't get enough respect in cinema. And Kubrick is such he's a filmmaker who likes to challenge himself. But I think he also knew that he could explore the medium of science fiction and do it in a profound way, that not only in terms of the visual storytelling and the ability to make groundbreaking special effects, of which there were many. It took 18 months to shoot at a cost of $6.5 million, just the special effects. And some of the groundbreaking techniques that were pioneered in that film certainly are still today considered revolutionary. And they, in a lot of ways, look almost better than they do now with digital with digital technology. They did everything in camera. It was all optically done. But what really interested Kubrick in the subject was the metaphysical interpretations or questions that he was asking about man's role in the universe, the themes of artificial intelligence, human evolution, and divinity and higher intelligence. And it's obviously one of those movies that when you watch, you have to reckon with it. I know, like I said, I've done, I have an entire 2.5 hour lecture on just this film. And it is one of my favorite movies. And I showed it to my girlfriend thinking, okay, she's never seen this. I'm going to blow her mind. And about 15 minutes into it, after the initial Dawn of Man sequence, which she thought was pretty cool, with the apes and all that, about 15 minutes into the space sequence, she's like, I can't watch this. This is too boring. And I think for a lot of people at the time, and a lot of people did not understand why this was a great movie or what they were even watching. People didn't really get it. A lot of critics panned it. Pauline Kael famously panned it. Pauline Kael was one of the top critics of her day for New York Magazine. She really did not like 2001. She went off about how it was pretentious, it was boring, it was garbage, and a lot of people thought that. And so they remarketed the film as The Ultimate Trip because of the Stargate sequence at the end of the film, where I hope I'm not spoiling this for anybody, but if you haven't seen 2001 by now, that's on you. There's the sequence at the end where Dave Bowman, the lead astronaut character, takes a pod to the monolith, that giant rectangular structure that is geometrically perfect and smooth, and he just goes towards it, and it basically opens a wormhole that takes him to another part of the galaxy where he's observed by a high intelligence creature. And then we don't really know what happens. He goes through his entire lifespan in a few minutes, which was brilliantly edited by Kubrick. And it has this film actually is noted for a couple of great edits. One of the great edits of all time, and probably the longest single jump cut edit, was the scene where Moonwatcher, the lead ape in the Dawn of Man sequence, uses a tool to defeat his enemy for the first time at the watering hole, and then throws a bone into the air, which turns into a nuclear armed satellite orbiting the Earth in that very famous match cut. So that's really some of Kubrick's genius right there, in that one scene, and also in that final scene at the end with the Stargate sequence leading to the evolution of Dave Bowman into the Star Child coming back to Earth. And then if you ever read the novel, it gives you some clues to what happened at the end, but it's one of those films that's open to a lot of interpretation and will always be open to a lot of interpretation, which is why I have an entire 2.5-hour lecture devoted to it. So it is actually one of the films that was nominated for some Academy Awards, but it's the only Academy Award that Stanley Kubrick ever won was for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it was for special visual effects, even though he did not do the special visual effects. It was Douglas Trumbull, who was his effects supervisor, and his team. Although Kubrick did work closely with them, Douglas Trumbull really got hosed on that one, but amazingly, it's the only Academy Award that Kubrick ever won. And the only reason he was given that was because you couldn't give it to an entire group of people. You had to give it to 3 at the most. And because he didn't want to shortchange any of Trumbull's team, he took it himself. Maybe that was a bit of a selfish move, but you know what? For Kubrick to have never won an Academy Award would be a travesty. So at least he got that one. And of course, it was also noted for his use of classical music, which he used to great effect in the Richard Strauss, also Sprach Zarathustra several times throughout that film, and Johann Strauss's Blue Danube Waltz during the docking sequence. And there's a lot of great music in this film that he would continue to use throughout his career, and also in his next film, which was A Clockwork Orange. And in 1971, this movie was one of those films that is just it's kind of a touchstone film, and it was very, very disturbing, and it tackled a lot of difficult subjects about human behavior. And it was based on A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. And originally Kubrick didn't want to make this film. He was given the book by his the co-writer of Terry Southern, who was the writer of Dr. Strangelove along with Kubrick. They worked on that screenplay. During the production of Dr. Strangelove, he gave him A Clockwork Orange, and Kubrick didn't like it because of the language that Burgess used. It was kind of a mixture of Cockney slang and Russian, and it was a language unique to the book. But Kubrick eventually decided to take it on because it was tackling subjects that he liked to tackle. It was a dystopian future with themes of morality, psychology, social engineering, the duality of human nature. And by the time when he read the book, the only person he had in mind for the role of Alex was Malcolm McDowell. And McDowell hadn't even heard of Kubrick, but but he actually he obviously that's one of those singular roles that an actor is cast and known for his entire career, and it's really an iconic role, and it has a lot of the signature moves of Kubrick. You know, the smooth, steady camera work, the tracking shots, the long shots, the wide angle, and the use of classical music. And it was a rated X at the time, and along with Midnight Cowboy, which actually won Best Picture, it was one of the only films to ever be nominated for Best Picture with an X rating, listed as 70 on AFI's Top 100 Films. So he wanted to do a film about Napoleon after Clockwork Orange, or actually after 2001. And in the time he was trying to make Napoleon, he had been doing a lot of research, exhausting research on the subject, but he had to back out of it for basically financial reasons, and because of the fact that there were other films that were coming out about Napoleon at the time, and they didn't really fare too well at the box office. So he ended up taking a lot of the research that he had done for Napoleon at the period at the time and used it for his next work, which was Barry Lyndon in 1975. And Barry Lyndon was based on the novel The Luck of Barry Lyndon by William Makepeace Thackeray. And it was, at the time, not really considered a commercial success. But like with a lot of Kubrick's films, over time, the opinion tends to strengthen, because I think a lot of times Kubrick's films require you to sort of sit with them and revisit them. And you don't often get at first screening all of the kind of genius that's being injected into these films, and the level of detail and the mastery of cinema that you're being given, you sometimes don't appreciate. And one of the things that Barry Lyndon is noted for is it's considered by a lot of people to be one of the most beautiful films ever shot. And if you ever watch it, it has some of the most beautiful cinematography because it was all done with natural light. Kubrick didn't want to use any electric lights at all because there were no electric lights at the time of this film, in the time of Barry Lyndon. And everything was done either with natural outdoor light, sunlight, or with candlelight. And the only way he was able to do that was with special lenses that were developed by NASA that were incredibly light sensitive. And he actually mounted them onto cameras that can only be mounted with that lens, and they were outfitted for those lenses so that he can get those incredible shots. And technically, it's really one of Kubrick's best films, even though it's maybe not. I mean, it's a 3-hour long period piece, but it has incredible costuming. You can see it was nominated for or won 4 Academy Awards: Best Score, Best Costume, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, and it really that really is an indication of the mastery technically of that film. So it was a while before Kubrick found his next project, and he was always looking for something to do, and he's like, okay, I want to try a horror film. So he was he was given the novel The Shining by a young author named Stephen King, who had just written Carrie and Salem's Lot, and he was known as sort of the new master of American Gothic, and this book The Shining was a bestseller. And Kubrick decided to make it into a novel, of which Stephen King was giddy about. He co-wrote it with Diane Johnson and really deviated a lot from King's novel. So King was very excited about the fact that Kubrick was making The Shining, not so much after he saw it, and never spoke well of it since. In fact, King made a deal with Kubrick in terms of buying back the rights for The Shining to do a TV miniseries in the 90s. Kubrick forced King to stipulate in procuring the rights to make that miniseries that he can never talk publicly about The Shining again. That's how much King did not like The Shining. But it is considered one of Kubrick's really all-time great films. And it's got so much subtext. It's very frightening. It's very disturbing. And it also uses Steadicam to great effect, which was a new technology at the time developed by Garrett Brown. And those slow, steady shots of that Kubrick uses to follow young Danny Torrance riding his tricycle through the Overlook Hotel and the hallways. Those are classic uses of the Steadicam, also through the hedge maze at the end of the film. And of course, with so many of Kubrick's films, it's the casting that is really top notch, and Jack Nicholson's legendary performance in that film. Here's Johnny, that great line, that was ad-libbed by Jack Nicholson. That was not in the script. But Kubrick was notorious for doing take after take after take, and he wanted his actors to ad-lib. And of course, one of the classic examples of that comes in the next film, and really probably it's his second to last film, but maybe his last great film, which was Full Metal Jacket. Although Eyes Wide Shut, his last film, is also but considered by many to be really one of Kubrick's best. But The Shining has a lot of interesting dynamics to it. It's got a lot of subtext. There's a lot of stuff that he added that was not in the novel, like the Native American, the allusions to a Native American genocide, and all the Native American imagery that he put in the hotel, which was not in the film. There's speculations about the film that run wild in terms of like conspiracy theories, and that he faked the moon landing. And if you don't know anything about the Kubrick moon landing, there's speculation that Stanley Kubrick actually directed the fake moon landing that NASA had him do in case the moon landing didn't work out. He always denied it, but if you ever watch the documentary Room 237, which is a great documentary, it speculates a lot about details that Kubrick put into the movie The Shining about him faking the moon landing and the fact that he couldn't talk about it. He used The Shining to sort of tell the audience that, hey, this is what happened. And there's some clues in there, but like with any other conspiracy theory, if you look for clues, you might find them, but you have to be looking for them, and then are they really there or not? And there's some great documentary footage, which I was going to show you, but obviously I don't have time, that Kubrick's daughter, Vivian Kubrick, documented the behind the scenes of The Shining. And it's got some really interesting footage of him working with Shelley Duvall and working with Jack Nicholson. He was notoriously difficult on Shelley Duvall in that film, but Jack Nicholson, he kind of gave a little bit more. And I think the reason he did that was he was motivated to make Shelley Duvall unsettled on screen, and so he used a little bit of method jujitsu to get her to feel unsettled in real life. And I think Duvall, in interviews subsequently, has said that she understood that what he was doing and appreciated it. But most actors who've worked with Kubrick think he was a really good director to work with, although he was notorious for doing take after take after take. His next film, Full Metal Jacket, you can see that he took a lot of time between films. He really waited for the right film to come and the right project to come. In 1987, Full Metal Jacket, he came back to the war genre, and this was a time when there were a lot of films being made about Vietnam. There was a good 5-8 year chunk of time where there really weren't any movies being made about Vietnam. The Green Berets, 1968 was one, but it wasn't really a realistic version of the war. And movies like The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now and Platoon started coming out. And so there was a lot of, it was a very marketable genre. And Kubrick, again, wanted to go back and make a film that was based on a short story or about a novel called The Short Timers, which was a semi-autobiographical about the experience of the war of a correspondent, of a news correspondent in the war. And it was really two parts. And it was the first part, the first 45 minutes of the scene is all on Paris Island, basic training. And then the second half of the movie, the second part of the movie is set in Vietnam. And it's got two of the great all-time performances of any film. In my opinion, I think that the Vincent D'Onofrio character of Leonard Lawrence, Private Pile, is classic. And to see his transformation from kind of a bungling, can't get it together young recruit into basically a psychotic maniac who has a psychotic breakdown, it was meant to sort of show the insanity of what these people were getting involved in and what they were going to in the war. And there was a great jump cut right after the first half of the movie ends into the Vietnam sequence, which is, again, some incredible editing. And if you ever watch it, pay attention to that transition. And the actor Lee Ermey, who played the drill sergeant, was an actual drill sergeant who was a consultant, and he was so good at insulting the recruits and making them feel like they were maggots, essentially, that Kubrick said, listen, the guy who I had originally cast, I'll keep you in the film, you'll play a different role, but I want this guy. And Ermey was just tremendous, and he ad-libbed about half of his lines. All of those insults that you see in the movie that he's hurling are just off of the top of his head. And again, this was a film, and Kubrick did not leave England. He didn't like to leave England. So this film was shot entirely in England, and the film was the whole entire set of Vietnam was reconstructed in parts of England that were going to be torn down anyway. So they had carte blanche to just blow the place up and make it look like Saigon. And it received his 13th nomination for an Oscar for Best Screenplay. And a long time went by, and he was wanting to do a film about the Holocaust. He was Jewish, and he was somebody who liked to make films about the inhumanity of man, and obviously the Holocaust is something that really is a great example of that. But he really gave up on that, even though he did more exhaustive, just like with Napoleon, exhaustive research. But at the time that Spielberg's Schindler's List came out, he said, "Look, I'm not gonna tackle that," because it's he figured that Spielberg had that done, and he kind of lost interest in doing it. But he was always interested in making another movie about that explored the sexual dynamic and the relationship of a husband and wife, and that film obviously was Eyes Wide Shut, which was based on Arthur Schnitzler, his 1926 novella. And it was really it was his last film, but to show you what a fanatical shooter he was, he it's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest shoot, 400 days. And now there was some speculation that Kubrick wasn't happy with the film, but others maintain that it's one of his best. But that's up to every one of us to determine. So I can see I went through his entire career very quickly, and there's so much to get to and to talk about. But in an hour, it's a tough thing to really break down a career that's as significant and as dense as Stanley Kubrick. But I hope that in the future, first of all, go and watch all of his films. You'll get so much out of watching any one of his films, but the ones that from Paths of Glory on specifically, they're all incredible. And some of the great scenes in film history are in those movies that he made, and he's just such an incredible director. And I really wish I had more time to talk about it with you, and I hope that I have a chance in the future to talk more, maybe specifically about any one of his films, but about directors in the future. And I only have a couple of minutes, but if you have any questions and you want to type them, or if you want to ask them and I have time, I'll be glad to answer them.
Yes, please. Okay, you can just hover over the bottom of your screen and you can see it says either Q&A or chat. And if you have any questions, if you can type them in and I'll read them, and Greg would be more than happy to answer the questions. Anybody have any comments or questions?
If nobody has any questions, I can talk for the next 2 minutes because there's a lot to say.
Somebody raised their hand. Let me see, who raised their hand? I cannot see. Oh, there's a question. Okay. Alex North score for 2001. I'm not sure what that means.
Oh, Alex North, yes. Great question. Alex North was he was commissioned to score 2001, and if I had time, I would love to show you. There's a clip that shows so he did the entire score. Alex North was a film composer, and he scored the entire film 2001. And it was actually the night of the premiere where Alex North was sitting in the audience and saw that his score was not in the film, because Kubrick decided to take out the score, which was fine. And if you ever hear, there is actually a version of it on the internet, and he replaced it with all of the classic music that you see in the film today. But that's a great question. Yes, it was originally scored by Alex North, but Kubrick made the decision to take it out and replace it, which Alex North did not know until he actually went and saw it. And he said, "Wait, where's my score?" But he got paid for it, so I guess he's okay. Thank you for that question.
Okay, the next question. I've read that some people have denied he was afraid of flying, but just was comfortable at his home in England. Is it certain? Is it certain it was his fear that kept him from leaving?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't know if it was necessarily a fear of flying, but he did like to stay at home. I think I don't know the answer to that definitively. I don't know if he had any kind of actual phobia of flying, but I think he was maybe just more comfortable, certainly shooting in England, and he liked to stay at home. I just don't think he liked to travel very much. So, I don't really know for sure if that was a legitimate phobia he had, or if he just felt comfortable staying in England.
And then somebody else wrote, this is not a question, but just to say I've seen all of Kubrick's films many times and get something new out of them every time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. You can watch his films over and over, and each time you watch it, you will get a different experience of appreciation. I think that's the mark of any great film. And all of his films are really like that. They really all have that hallmark of having such a density of meaning and attention to detail of every aspect of filmmaking. The score, the directing of the actors, the cinematography, the editing, the music, and the subtext of the meaning of the plots. And it's just all what makes him a masterful director.
Okay, and then we have, which modern director has borrowed most from him? Does any film come to mind?
That's a good question. I think he's really influenced almost every modern director. I think it's hard to say. I think that certainly Martin Scorsese's used a lot of his techniques in terms of his Steadicam usage. I mean, you think about that scene in Goodfellas where they're going through the Copacabana. That reminded me in some sense of the scene in Paths of Glory going through the trenches, and just his use of, which was incidentally done without Steadicam, amazingly enough, but it looks great. But I think that almost every, I know that Steven Spielberg was influenced by 2001, and that's one of the movies that made him want to make Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So yeah, I think that any modern filmmaker, it's hard to say that, because Kubrick had so many different types of film genres that he worked in, that he's influenced almost every director of those specific types. But one of the great things about him as a director was that he didn't, even though he had a specific style and a visual style, he didn't have any specific type of film or type of genre. But I think that any filmmaker today who's, I think Paul Thomas Anderson is a good example maybe of somebody who was very influenced by Kubrick's style, his visual style. In fact, I think even, I think Paul Thomas Anderson, who directed films like Magnolia and Boogie Nights and There Will Be Blood, is really one of the better directors today. I think he's a good example of somebody who's influenced by him.
And then someone writes, I read that Kubrick insisted on Dr. Strangelove being released before Failsafe, the straight version of the same story, which killed Failsafe commercially.
Oh, well, that's probably true. Yeah, I think that there's, I think I've seen the movie Failsafe, and it's kind of the straightforward version of that. I think that's kind of what distinguishes Dr. Strangelove from that movie, because the performances in Dr. Strangelove are so iconic. And you think about the actors and who were in that, George C. Scott and Sterling Hayden and Peter Sellers, and it's hard to compete with Dr. Strangelove because it works on so many levels, and it's such a brilliant comedic film. And if you think about the performances in that film, Peter Sellers obviously stands out, but George C. Scott is hilarious in that film. His performance is really incredible, and it's so funny. And one funny little nugget about that is that Kubrick got those reactions from Scott by telling him, these are just rehearsals. We're just going to film these. Just go over the top. See how far you can stretch it. And he ended up using those, and Scott was not happy about that. But it ended up that he appreciated it down the road. But I don't know if Kubrick actually had that much spite in him that he would, but maybe he did. I don't know.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Greg. I mean, welcome to our live streaming lecture series. We hope to have you back again in the near future.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And again, remember that we are open 9 to 9 for coming in and browsing at the library and taking material out. And certainly we still have curbside checkout if that's something that you're still interested in. Thank you so much. Everybody have a safe afternoon. And Greg, we will be seeing you soon, hopefully.
Great. Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks, Elisa.